You're up. Go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Angie.
I'm Bobby. I'm Brett. I'm Carlos.
And today we're talking about the 5 most important things in making the most out of your message. So, as you can tell from this triangle, there are 3 points where you should consider when making a presentation. The previous 2 groups have already talked about the other 2, and so today we'll be talking about the message. So what exactly is a message? The message is what the content is in your presentation, such as how you structure your message, how you highlight your main points, what kind of mediums you use, which leads us to our overview. So today we'll be talking about structuring a presentation, creating information chunks, selecting a structured pattern, explaining the flow, and mediums to consider. There are 2 approaches when considering your structure in a presentation. The first one is direct approach, and that is when your conclusion comes first. People use this to, save some time. It's easy to follow. It's also in the audience's interest because, say you're in a room full of executives, they don't really have time to listen to your whole speech and then wait until the end for your main points. So they would rather have your main points at the very beginning. The indirect approach is also when you put conclusions last. However, this takes more time and it's harder to follow, but people still use this approach because say you're presenting in a different culture. Some cultures think it's inappropriate to put your main points first. So in that case, you would use the indirect approach. Also, you would use it if your audience does not agree with you. So if you put your main points at the very end, they won't disagree with you right away. So now I'll pass it on to Bobby, who will talk about creating information chunks.
Hi. According to the textbook, people only have about 30 seconds of working memory. And if you read a little bit further, it goes on to say that it's actually really half that. So making a memorable presentation that's easy for the audience to follow and just as easy for the presenter to explain should be one of your biggest objectives. And there's 5 ways that we can do this. The first is creating logical categories. Simply make the presentation make sense to your people or to your audience. You've done your research, you should know who your target audience is, so you can make something that you should know what they do or don't already know. So it's just got to flow and make sense. Limit the number of sections. If you get too many sections, it can get overwhelming. The presenter can get tripped up and in turn confuse the audience and have to go back and forth between slides to re-explain themselves. Groups of 3. Groups of 3 are easy to remember because it's a sequence. 1, 2, 3, ABC, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a logical flow that's easy, yet again, for the audience to follow, and the next block of instruction builds on the one before it. Subcategories. Complex presentations require not just topics, but subcategories for those topics to explain hard to explain situations in more minute detail for the audience to get the overall effect and understanding that the presenter is trying to explain. And lastly, we have 2-sided options, which compare and contrast 2 different options. They can be 2-sided options. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. The presenter wants a neutral stance. So if it's a controversial issue, half the class might think one way, the other half might think the other way. You don't want to offend anybody. You just want to point out the facts to both sides and see where they mesh in the middle, overlap or don't overlap. Next we have select a structured pattern. Yet again, pattern makes it easy for the audience to follow and the presenter to present. The most common is topic. Topic is exactly that. If it's not a bullet point on your presentation, people aren't likely to ask you a random question on the NFL 2016-17 season. You might ask me one of these questions. Importance. The structural pattern for importance can either go from most important to least important, or least important to most important, depending on the type of presentation that you're trying to give. Time, there's 2 different ways you can do time. Time can be a history. If anyone's taking a history class, you see a bunch of bullet points with the War of 1812 and World War I, World War II. Or it can be a timeline of future events that haven't happened yet. Say you're your company gives you a project, you've got a month to do it. You have to make something for your team that says, we start here, we've got milestones here, and we finish here. We need to be finished by here. Process is how. Instead of putting a bunch of words explaining exactly how, maybe a flow chart of how a process works, with arrows pointing to the next block of instruction and so forth. Location. Location is where. It's taking your audience on a tour. You've got pictures of a new auditorium or a new facility. You can have pictures, take them on a little tour. Contrast, as I spoke of in the previous section, it compares two items. Solution actually starts with a problem, gives a solution, and then gives an example of a solution in action. So the problem could be you had a vendor, a shipping vendor of 20 years who just went out of business. Solution, hire a new vendor. In action, they can transport from point A to point B. I hope most of this was useful for you for future presentations, but I'm going to hand it off to Rhett. He's going to explain the flow.
Thank you, Bobby. So when it comes to flow, the last thing we want in our presentation is to have a bunch of disjointed little bits of information, little ideas. And what the flow does is it acts as the glue in the direction for our presentation and keeps it from becoming that. And so one of the first ways you can do that is examine different themes or patterns there are to the information that we're presenting. Some examples of this might be a puzzle, different aspects of this that we're trying to see how they connect. Perhaps it's a problem and a solution, as Bobby mentioned. Sometimes it can come off as an equation. Perhaps we have two items that equal another thing, two aspects of a problem that combine to form something. And a really good example of a theme or pattern would be what Angie shared earlier, which is in the book, this triangle showing the audience, intent, and message. And this is a good example of what you might call a journey, where there's a progression of ideas that combine to form a bigger picture. Utilizing the preview is extremely important. So if a theme or pattern would be the roadmap for an entire presentation, a preview acts as the road signs. And when it comes to movies or books, in those mediums, people can flip back a page or rewind. But in a presentation, people need to know exactly what is ahead of them, so then when they get there, they understand what you're talking about as you're talking about it, since they can't go back. And previews are very useful for increasing retention in that way. Finally, alerting the audience when a new section begins. Typically, it's just the reality of attention is that as the section goes on and on, people just kind of seem to get tired and pay less and less attention. And so what this does is it says, hey, listen up. And so it allows the audience to perk their ears up again. The textbooks actually explains that there's sort of a wave motion to attention, that anytime there's a new section, things go back up. And so the more that you can sort of demarcate your sections, the more times the audience will wake back up during the presentation. So now I'm going to pass it on to Carlos, and he's going to share about utilizing different mediums in presentations.
Okay, a medium can be used to implement the information to the audience, which is why the message strategy is connected to the audience strategy. You can compare your presentation to many options, such as private conversations, meetings, high-tech alternatives, and written options. An example of a private conversation can be, if you have a small audience, then a private conversation will be better instead of a presentation like for a large group. For a meeting, if you want information, then a meeting will be best suited for that, such as what we're doing as a group. We have to meet to gather information to come up with this presentation. If the audience is in different places, then you can use high-tech alternative, such as Skype, FaceTime, video conference, any online tech. And if the presentation alone is not enough, then you can hand out written material. So that's one example of the written options. You can also, you don't want to isolate the presentation. You don't want to make it seem like it's isolated, so you want to add Q&A sessions at the end. these are some of the features and pros and cons of it. If the feature is a high content or low audience involvement, then you as a presenter is going to make you seem like an expert because you want to inform. But one of the cons is, since you seem like you're an expert, you fail to get information or feedback or anything of that sort. A feature of no record, an example of that, if you don't have a handout, then it's going to make it hard for people that do not attend to see what they missed. A pro of that could be it's going to limit, information leaks and all that stuff. If you go to the face-to-face and group feature, then one of the pros is it's going to enable you as a speaker to clarify what you mean. One of the cons is going to involve high cost and scheduling problems. High cost could be different venues. Scheduling problems could be, not everyone has the same time available, so that's going to conflict with everything. If you have any questions or anything like that, this is going to wrap up our chapter. Also, it's going to wrap up the first part of the book, which is audience intent and message.
Any questions? Okay, let's have our quiz, and yeah, that's good.